Let me now bring in Congressman Dusty Johnson. He's a Republican from South Dakota, and he's a member of that House Select Committee on China. Congressman, it's good to hear from you. Thank you for coming on. Let me start with, we heard from Mike Gallagher earlier, the chair of the committee that you're on, can't get weapons there fast enough. What does that look like, and what is the balance between helping Ukraine and helping Taiwan that you'd like to see?
Well, your other guests were right about a depletion of the stockpile. So I do think we want to be strategic and forward-looking. Churchill, I think, called the United States the arsenal of democracy, and clearly that is still true. But we do need to arm the Taiwanese. The threat from the Chinese Communist Party is only growing. We have seen their pattern of aggression get, I think, more provocative. And so this is something the Select Committee is going to be spending a lot of time discussing.
There's a lot of hesitance to call this a Cold War. So what would you call it with China?
Well, I would call it a Cold War. I know, listen, that is not an official view on the Select Committee. Yeah. Some of my colleagues disagree with that. But, Chuck, I think we've been in a Cold War for 10 or 15 years. But it's been a one-sided Cold War. The Americans have largely been sleepwalking through these patterns of aggression. Being nice to China, asking them pretty please, and being concerned about agitating them has not worked. It hasn't helped the Uyghurs. It hasn't helped to slow Chinese efforts to destabilize our country and others. I think the time has come to be honest with the American people that the Chinese Communist Party is absolutely an adversary of our nation.
What kind of red line do you think we should create here if China provides lethal, essentially, ammunition to the Russians?
I think it is a big, big problem. It is time for Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party to pick a side. They have tried to act like they're neutral. They're clearly not. But I think we need to amp up the global pressure on them. They can, birds of a feather flock together. So it wouldn't surprise any of us if Xi Jinping and Putin, both tyrannical dictators, started doing even more to help one another. But I think there need to be serious sanction and other economic accountability mechanisms if they do that.
What could be done that would make China flinch?
Well, in the short term, I don't know. But in the long term, we need a smart decoupling between what we buy and sell with the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, clearly, it's not a strategic problem if we're buying cheap T-shirts from China. I think it is a problem if there are life-saving pharmaceuticals that we are only getting from China. I think it's a problem that we have allowed China to gain entirely too much control over our food supply. Food security is national security. The Chinese Communist Party, by the way, has increased their holdings of foreign farmland by 1,000% in recent years. This is not just an accident. It is deliberate. And I think we need to do a better job.
I was looking into that. I understand it's increased by 1,000%. They still hold. Canada is by far the country that owns more American farmland than the Chinese do. Now, obviously, Canada.
My concern,
Go ahead.
My concern isn't just American farmland. You're right, Chuck. The cattle are still largely in the barn with regard to the Chinese buying American farmland. But they have massive holdings in Africa, Southeast Asia, South America. Those are things that need to be concerning to all freedom-loving people.
Let me ask you about Africa, because we're going to get another test vote today. And it's, maybe I'm one of the few that sort of weird junkies on this. There's going to be this UN vote, a resolution about the one-year anniversary of the war. And look, we know we can have a debate about the effectiveness of the United Nations, but it certainly is a temperature check on whose side are you on. And a lot of these African countries have been staying neutral. What does the United States need to do to get some of these African countries who, in many ways, Russia and China are paying them more attention than the United States is, which may explain the neutrality?
Americans have not paid enough attention to exactly the dynamics you're talking about. We have, in recent years, I think, kind of pulled back a little bit into ourselves. We haven't cared as much about, South America and Africa in particular as we used to. China has been excited to fill that void, and it's a real problem. We know that there are probably as many African governments that feel a connection with, a loyalty to the Chinese Communist Party as feel a connection with our country. That's a problem. We know that South America is a much bigger trading partner collectively with China than it is with the United States.
Yeah.
We cannot go it alone. We've got to continue to build a coalition of freedom-loving people.
Tell me about the conversation you can have with your constituents, because in the Midwest in particular, I've noticed a growing, you look at the polling, it's not just on ideology, but sort of in the Midwest, there's a I don't want to call it isolationism in general, but sort of like, okay, but what about here? How do you make the case that, hey, funding the war in Ukraine, defending Taiwan is in your best interest, constituent X from Pierre, South Dakota?
I start by reminding them that Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin are every bit as dictatorial and tyrannical as any of the famous villains of the 20th century. And I think when you characterize it like that, remind them that America was made less safe by the actions of those 20th century villains. Their eyes are opened a little bit. We want American security and safety. If we want a safe America, America cannot go it alone.
I had Mike McFall on my podcast today, and he was wondering, can you make a transactional argument? Can you basically make the argument, look, it's cheaper today to help Ukraine win this war than to fight Putin down the road?
I think you can make that argument, but to me, there's even a broader argument. That is, if you believe in American exceptionalism, and I do, if you think that for 246 years America has overwhelmingly been a force for good, and I do, then that means we got to be on the side of the good guys. Yeah. It means that we don't let dictators take land with force. There's a rules-based international system that was largely set up by America in the wake of World War II. It's worked a lot better than we sometimes give it credit for. Walking away from all of that, just to go back to the apathy of daily life, is not going to make us safer one gosh darn bit.
No, North America is not the island some people think it is. Congressman Dusty Johnson, Republican from South Dakota, really appreciate you coming on, sharing your perspective with us. Good to see you.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.